Welcome to Wimmer's Wilderness. I'm your host, George Wimmer. I have 30 years of volunteer work, community organizing, and 16 years in local government, 12 of those as mayor. Wimmer's Wilderness is an informed look at politics, community, government, environment, and education from a local perspective. Hey, another community brief today. We're going to talk a little bit about education. I want to start out with a few housekeeping things here. We've got our road board was out, so that's why we've kind of had a pause in recording. I've trying to also work with the video format of it as well, and doing some different camera placements and things like that. I'm not going to get any better looking, but just to make it a little bit more interactive for the audience that watches the videos as well. So I had a couple questions about the different t-shirts and hats and things I wear. Some of the hats and t-shirts are gifts from people who watch and that good stuff. Others that I love. Wherever I go, I always get a hat or a t-shirt, kind of as memorabilia type thing. And I just love t-shirts and hats. So there you have it. Education, our topic of the day. We had quite an interesting last couple months when it comes to education. We've had it kind of take over some elections in New Jersey and Virginia, or at least what they're saying were the main drivers of the election turnout. And what we have is really a conflating of a lot of differing things. So in Virginia especially, you have the governor's race where the governor-elect Youngkin won, and a big part of it was, I think a lot of the restrictions with COVID and that, and people just being worn out with that, but also with this whole critical race theory stuff, which there's no critical race theory being taught in any K through 12 school. Usually isn't taught undergrad in college. It's usually graduate school level and above. But the conflating happened where anything that was discussed, talking about civil rights, talking about the U.S. past in slavery, and then also the treatment of indigenous peoples, of Native Americans. And so that all got conflated of actual teaching history, which should get taught at every level. I'm a former history major myself. I love history. But, and the reason I want to talk about this isn't to delve into all of that, but is how it really affects education on that local level. You have a lot of local school boards that have seen, this issue come up. And again, none of those schools are teaching critical race theory. Our own U.S. rep where I'm at put out a thing that, he was against critical race theory. The governor-elect Youngkin in Virginia said that he's going to, outlaw or ban critical race theory being taught in K through 12 education in the state of Virginia, which then reminded me of, St. Patrick in Ireland, who, as the story goes, he got rid of all the snakes in Ireland. Of course, there were no snakes to begin with, right? There aren't any snakes. There are no indigenous snakes in Ireland because of the ice ages and the way that the island of Ireland ended up floating away from mainland Europe. So, yeah, he can pass that, and okay, there won't be any critical race theory taught in K through 12, and there wasn't to begin with. But where it gets into the local governments, okay, and local school board races, local school board decisions, it's become so toxic that people are saying, oh, we shouldn't be doing this, we shouldn't be doing that. It's not being done. It is a huge amount of wasted energy, okay? Now, there can be discussions about, the horrible impacts, and there should be discussions about the horrible impacts of slavery on the United States, on the treatment of indigenous peoples in North America. That should all occur, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. That can't be seen as some kind of weakness if we have those discussions. So I don't know. I really feel like the animosity, and this has gone through, and really this has fired up a lot of things with COVID and that, where you have the mask mandates, you have some areas have vaccination requirements for COVID. more and more school districts are going to do that. And of course, there have been, vaccinations required for over 100 years in this country. Only COVID now has become this big political football. And it's, again, and I know I'm going to have some people who listen to me who aren't going to like me saying this, but there's no reason for this animosity about COVID vaccinations. Okay. I understand everybody's tired of having to wear masks and do these different things, and in my area there are no mandates for masks. Okay, and there may never be again. Um, there are still some in other places, but again, it's just the amount of anger and frustration and what that's doing in local communities where you're having people getting ripped apart by this, right? People who have been friends a long time are just getting are just it's really tearing at that local community fiber, okay? Fabric, I should say, excuse me. And that shouldn't happen. And school board meetings should be discussing curriculum, should be discussing policy that helps educate our students. Instead, a lot of it is devolving to one or two nonsensical issues, okay? If your school board has determined that there should be a mask mandate, then there's a mask mandate, okay? If you don't like that, then you go through the normal process of voting them out. You don't show up and threaten them, okay? They're making the best decisions. And most school districts don't have mask mandates, okay? Same thing when it comes to vaccinations. This is an entirely safe vaccine to take, okay? People who say it's not, we're just going to disagree, okay? And everybody can have their own opinion. But when it comes to public policy and public health policy, we have to be guided by what is the consensus of scientific and medical opinion on these topics, as we always have, okay? There's a recent court case that went to the Supreme Court that they were trying to say that, this government entity didn't have the right to require vaccinations. And the Supreme Court, even with the Trump judges on there, two of his most recent appointments to the Supreme Court upheld government at every level's ability to require vaccinations. It's good public health. We have to get away from, yelling and screaming and all these types of things. We can have different opinions, okay? But the thing that has helped government work, especially local government, where you often know the people who are yelling at you, okay? I had a person come in my first meeting or second meeting when I was elected mayor, seems like, a whole other life ago, who came in and compared me to the Nazis massacring Jews and Russian prisoners of war, okay? And then when that ended, I said thank you and moved on to the next subject, okay? So we just have to get to a place, because a lot of these people who are, very upset are coming from a good place. I do think that. But the behavior is unacceptable, okay? And we have so much bad behavior. Well, it's on airlines, school board meetings, wherever it's at. We need to take the temperature down so we can have the discussion. And you know what? When you listen to somebody, and I would say this all the time when I was in office, just because I don't agree with your opinion doesn't mean I didn't hear you, okay? You don't have to agree with somebody to listen to them. And when somebody who is in a position of power does listen to you and then still doesn't agree with you, that's not an act of war, okay? Everybody's entitled to their own thoughts. But when it comes to actually putting forth policy that's good for the community as a whole, that oftentimes does rub some people the wrong way. But it can't get to this point. I mean, some of the statements people are making are just so out of the realm of reasonableness. It's ridiculous, okay? And you're generally going to be wrong if you make any kind of comparison to Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, which has come up. And that kind of segues us into the second part of this that I wanted to discuss, which is the recent state of Texas laws that they put on the books saying that you have to, and it's going to be copied, and I believe it's already started to be copied in other states, that you have to show two sides to any controversial issue. And of course, the person who was designated by Texas's Department of Education to discuss it with a group of teachers to explain what this law means used the Holocaust as an example. And you could hear the audible gasps and questions from teachers in this seminar. There aren't two sides to the Holocaust, okay? The Holocaust happened. So people who deny the Holocaust, it happened, all right? If you don't believe that, there's not, I can't help you, all right? So it did happen. And then two, it was obviously a terrible, horrible crime against humanity, okay? So there's not another side to it. But that's what they chose. And then one of the teachers said, you know, how can you have two sides to that? And the presenter said, oh, we've had people try to present, or, you know, it's come up to have a second side to it. There are certain things that like that don't have a second side, okay? Slavery doesn't have two sides like, ooh, there's good things about slavery. There's not, okay? Now, the United States wouldn't have existed in the framework that it does if it wasn't for slavery, okay? And then that gets into the whole, you know, what kind of remuneration needs to be made back to the descendants of slaves, which is a whole nother topic. But when you have these kinds of laws put on the books, it's not these big, you know, ridiculous, like, you know, the Holocaust has two sides, which clearly it doesn't. It's the fact now that you're going to have librarians and teachers scared to discuss certain topics. The law's biggest impact is going to be in causing hundreds, if not thousands, of educators to self-edit and not be willing to have good conversations, educational conversations, for our students to learn and become critical thinkers. You know, one legislator in Texas put together, it was 800 or 850 books. He wanted to know if they're in any of these public schools, if public libraries have them, because consider them controversial. Then we have the thing, I think South Carolina, North Carolina, I can't remember offhand, but a book about the actions of slaves, and wanting that book taken out because it dealt with hard, cold facts that, you know what, when one group of people enslaves another group of people, the people who are enslaved will do desperate things, at times wanting their own children to die, to not even be born, because they don't want them to live the life of slavery and degradation and cruelty that slavery is. Now, nobody alive today, you know, owns slaves in the United States. And before we get into this whole north-south thing, a lot of northern states allowed slavery as well. It wasn't just Confederate states that allowed slavery. And when the Civil War started, there were northern states that had slaves and were allowed to keep them. Okay? It wasn't until really the very close to near to the end of the war where the idea of freeing all slaves was really put forth strongly, okay? And with the Emancipation Proclamation, it was to end slavery, to essentially confiscate property of Southerners. So that's a muddled mess too. There's a lot of gray in these types of issues, okay? But it's all a terrible tragedy that needs to be discussed. And when you start banning books that are critically thinking and showing what happens to the fabric of society, especially at the local level, because it's those local decisions, okay, that has the biggest impact on our lives. And when you have these important documents, right, to be wiped away so our kids can't read them, whether our kid is 20 years old, whether our kid is 15 or 12, and obviously it needs to be age appropriate, but these concepts have to be discussed. And none of those things that I've been talking about are part of critical race theory, okay? It's not. It's about learning history. It's good civics. It's good public education. So again, sorry if this is going to annoy some people, but I really believe in the small conservative methodology of governing and of being. of where government needs to be small but efficient and intelligent in what they're doing. Okay? And when you go out and try to start banning and destroying books or not having good critical discussions, okay, about topics like slavery, like the horrible treatment done to Native Americans, then we are really hurting ourselves as a nation. Okay? So our next topic, our next discussion won't be quite as dire as this, although a lot of things happening in local government right now are pretty tough. But we're gonna go on to some environmental things in our next discussion. But I just wanted to share this, that, you know, I guess to round it all off, the top three things. One, the temperature has to be taken down. We've got to stop yelling and screaming at each other. Two, we have got to be able to have critical discussions, fact-based, researched, and not the, hey, I researched it on Facebook kind of thing, but actual research, all right, about things. And not one of us is an expert in everything, nor should we pretend to be. We need to understand and respect science. And then thirdly, we can't allow political parties to hijack and to continue to stoke the fire, okay? Because that just keeps everybody at a boiling point, and that's not healthy. So anytime, you see a U.S. senator or whomever start stoking a big controversy, they're not doing it to help us. They're certainly not doing it to help us on the local level. They're doing it for their own political career, and they're doing it to raise money. Okay? So I just wanted to kind of express this and get that out there. Now a little business of my own. Go to wimmerswilderness.org if you're interested in any of our great bee products. We're getting pretty low on our raw honey. It's grade A raw honey. But we have plenty of candles and lip balm, and we'll have those for quite some time. If you have any requests for differing flavored lip balms or different design candles, please let me know. Again, it's all at wimmerswilderness.org. Right on there, it'll be a link to the Beehive page where you can find all those particular products. Make sure you like our post and follow us on all of our social media. Facebook, Twitter, started doing some TikTok videos, Instagram, all that. It really helps a lot. It just takes, a couple seconds on your part to do that, but it helps to keep all this going. So I appreciate each and every one of you. I want to thank everyone who is following, listening, and all of that. I couldn't do this if you weren't doing that. And if there are other topics that you would like me to discuss, please let me know. So again, thank you so very much. Thank you for joining us today. Help us spread the word by telling your friends, family, and heck, even your frenemies that they can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Luminary, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, TuneIn Radio. Pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast, you're going to find Wimmer's Wilderness. To learn more about us, go to wimmerswilderness.org. Make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Wimmer's Wilderness.